Right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. I'm Husnara, the editor of Cheeky Little Careers, and I'm really delighted to say that I've been joined by Trish McLellan, who is a member of LawCare, which is a charity and sort of advocates, I guess, for mental health and well-being for lawyers and the legal profession. How are you, Trish?
I'm fine. Delighted to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
I probably did a really poor introduction for you. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Yes, no problem at all. No, your introduction was absolutely fine, but
Well, thank
as
you.
ever, I'll add to it. So my background is as a solicitor in private practice in England and Wales, but I've now been with LawCare, oh gosh, probably about 15 years now. And we're the charity that supports and promotes good mental health and well-being in the legal sector across the UK and Ireland, looking to support anyone within the sector with any issues impacting on either their professional or their personal life.
Thank you. And, we're obviously delighted to have you here because we as websites are huge advocates for well-being amongst professionals. And I don't think that, anyone should have to compromise their well-being to flourish and thrive at work. I think the two need to be people should aim to get a degree of equilibrium. And also, it's such an important time to be talking about mental health in light of the pandemic and the stress and anxiety that might be causing individuals. What are you seeing? What are people contacting LawCare about?
Well, I suppose there's a huge range, as ever. It's fair to say since March, probably about a third of our contacts have had a COVID element. And many in the profession like to be in control. And the current situation means that none of us have very much control. It's all very unpredictable. So people are struggling with that. The majority of our support contacts have a stress element. People are, beginning to be concerned about job security, about possible redundancy, financial concerns are coming in. People with pre-existing mental health issues might be finding those exacerbated. As I touched on, people who haven't ever encountered any kind of mental health issue are finding this current situation very unsettling. So a huge range really of contributing factors are presenting many of us with, stress symptoms that we're struggling and looking for support with.
So what do you say to someone who is, struggling with, I guess for so many people, it's that uncertainty, and especially as we enter another period where potentially restrictions are going to get even tighter. They're already becoming tighter with this new rule of 6 that's come in. And as the sort of nights draw in and the weather deteriorates, how can you sort of overcome that sort of anxiety that comes on the back of uncertainty?
Well, I think what we aim to do is primarily listen to people and help them come up with a plan and solutions and help them identify aspects they can control and focus on those, and encourage them to perhaps let go of aspects that we can't control. So seeking support and information rather than struggling on in silence and feeling isolated. So getting people really to drift away from those kind of personality traits that are common in many of us that are attracted to the profession, where we soldier on. There's still quite a bit of stigma around mental health within society in general, and certainly within this profession in particular.
Agreed. I think lawyers are their own worst enemies in terms of actually acknowledging to themselves that they need help. And I think that for so many people, asking for help is almost seen as a sign of weakness. If you are having sort of concerns with mental health, what's your advice with regard to approaching your employer about it?
Well, certainly it's often useful to initiate your conversation, if you are struggling to open up about these issues, it's often, as an opening, better to talk to someone that you trust and confide in, and them, and articulate your concerns perhaps before you're going to approach an employer. But thinking in terms of those conversations with your employer, trying to drill down about those aspects that you're finding difficult and thinking about some possible solutions that might help with that. There are lots of resources on our website about how to have those conversations about what a mentally healthy workplace might look like that can help people with that. If people are expecting that a particular manager might be quite tricky for them to have that conversation with, thinking about who else they may confide in. Are there any mental health first aiders, any ambassadors within the firm? Is HR a better place to have that discussion? Should they perhaps be speaking to an independent organization first? But to prepare for that meeting, rather than having that experience of feeling they needed to get something off their chest and then going along and perhaps becoming tearful or not articulating everything that's concerning them. And then people get frustrated.
Yep. And again, connected to the pandemic is obviously concern over job security. And I know from running the careers clinic for the Law Society, there have been, a higher number of inquiries from lawyers who want appointments, who are either concerned about job security because they worry that once the furlough scheme ends next month in October, that they may not end up going back. And then there are, of course, some people who sadly have already lost their jobs. What can people be doing in terms of self-care if they are having to cope or manage with a redundancy situation?
I think one of the most difficult things to do, but one of the most important aspects, is to recognize that this is as a result of a hugely unprecedented situation, and it isn't a personal a reflection on them personally. Because once you begin to have your self-esteem and your self-confidence affected, it's very difficult to convince yourself, let alone a prospective employer, that you're the right fit. So that key message is to try, difficult though it is, to try to keep that in mind. And then if you are a very practical person, which many people in the profession are, to set about, if you have some time, to be looking at acquiring skills and experience that might help you in that next step. Doing things like recognizing that it might not be the ideal opportunity, but you might have to take a stepping stone or think a little bit more flexibly for your next appointment, but not to panic, and to recognize that you have transferable skills, and to network, seek advice such as the clinics you've mentioned, make sure your CV is fit for purpose, and really just to recognize that overnight you haven't become a different person, to take a breath and move on.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. And another, sorry, I'm just firing questions at you about some of the themes I guess I get sort of referred to. Working from home. Okay, I know now there's certainly on the part of the English government that people should start returning to their offices, and for me, working from home has worked really, really well, and I'm certainly in not any particular hurry to go back. That said, I think that creating that boundary where work doesn't filter into my personal life has been really challenging for me, partly because I'm my own worst enemy. I'm a bit of a workaholic and I love what I do. So it's easy enough for me to say, oh, do you know what, I'll just do another hour, or I might just carry on in the lounge with my laptop.
In front of the TV.
And then of course you've got other people working from home. Has been a complete nightmare because they've got childcare responsibilities, they've been homeschooling, they don't have the luxury of the space that perhaps I have, etc. How have you managed working from home, and what have you learned in terms of ideas that you can share with others?
Well, funnily enough, the whole LawCare team has always worked from home, but even for us within this team, it's very different being at home all of the time and not going out to meetings, not engaging with funders. Not any of our training is now delivered online. We would usually do that in person, and that personal contact is really important for us as humans. And I think that has been something that many have reported to us that we've missed. As a team, we have spoken very regularly on the phone, via video calls. I think the risk is that we're so reliant on email as a speedy, efficient way of communication these days that doesn't always have sufficient personal touch to it. You can miss what's happening via email. And I think that it really is important that we still engage with our team. So I think we have probably spoken more frequently. We're a small team and we're always incredibly busy, but we have kept in touch. So in terms of the employment side of things, that is what I would recommend. In terms of home, as you say, many of us in the profession have those perfectionist workaholic traits.
Yeah.
And it's making sure that you try to recognize your boundaries and you accept that, yes, there may be some evenings when you're checking your emails at 10:30, but if that's becoming a very regular occurrence, then that isn't healthy. And going back to the 5 steps for well-being that is evidence, research-based, the kind of things that we should be doing to make sure that we have a reasonable work-life balance, whether we're office-based or home-based, or as some people are finding, a combination of the two.
Yeah. Now, I've heard all sorts of novel examples. Someone said that they get their husband to just walk around the block as if they're commuting to work because you have that downtime. And I certainly missed that. Although I hated commuting, I found not being able to have that hour on the train to switch off.
Absolutely.
So it does require a bit of discipline and some sort of planning, but it's so important.
It does. I mean, you don't, even though, as you say, the cost and the time and the energy involved in commuting is not insurmountable. You would process during that period. You would build yourself up to going to work and mentally prepare and prioritize what you had to do. And likewise, you would have that opportunity to desensitize before you're back in the home environment. You don't have that same luxury when you're just walking down a staircase and you can hear the dog barking when the postman comes or the children coming in from school. And it has been incredibly challenging for some people in this sector to find the space and to keep appropriate boundaries to be able to focus and concentrate on incredibly important work.
And what about the opposite? Now that some businesses or firms are saying that we'll encourage people to go back, albeit, it's a very slow drip feed. It's going to be in very sort of limited numbers. Because it's amazing how quickly people can become climatized to a certain sort of structure to their day. I know earlier this week, I had an 8 a.m. meeting via Zoom, but it meant setting my alarm for 6:30, which was the first time I'd done that in 6 months. And I am yet to get on a train. I don't know when I'll do that, and I would be fearful. How do you sort of manage that transition back into the workplace so that, it's sustainable and you don't get yourself in a sort of panic state?
Yes, I mean, certainly some people are having anxiety about those kind of issues. Again, I think it's about communication and finding out from your employer what is essential, what isn't, and engaging with them about your concerns and seeing how they can be addressed. So obviously if it's about the commute, then there's a limit to what they can do with that. But in terms of the workplace, what can be done to reassure you that you are going to feel safe? But it's a transition, and it's going to take a period of readjustment. As you say, it's been 6 months and we are creatures of habit, and we've created new habits, and we quite like some of them. We quite like having that little bit longer in bed in the morning. So research suggests that the people are working longer hours though, so we're certainly giving it back at the end of the day. And looking at what you can do to make sure that your workplace accommodates some of those things that you think you'll miss from home. So if you were getting out at lunchtime to walk, trying to adhere to that and not just letting it go because one environment has to be so desperately different from the other.
Yeah. And how have you found lockdown yourself, in terms of, have you acquired any new lockdown hobbies or interests?
Well, I certainly, at the beginning of lockdown, I think our little dog was hiding because we were taking her out so frequently. So initially I quite enjoyed it because my older children were at home and we were all together and it felt like us against the world. But as it's gone on longer, and then there are trickier things to deal with and elderly parents to look after from a distance, it just complicates things for everyone, because we are all experiencing this together. And most of the time I've got lots of support. I do a job I love. I've got a very supportive team around me, and I've got a happy family life. I'm very fortunate. I live in a place where I've got space. There are lots of green spaces around me. So I recognize that my experience has been a lot easier than the majority. But even so, I would quite like to get back to a situation where we can plan a holiday and hope that we can be able to go on. It's the fact that the longevity of this, I think, is now becoming difficult, even for those of us who haven't found it incredibly difficult so far.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had highs and lows. Some days, everything around me just seems perfectly normal because I, like you, used to working from home, but not on a 5 days in a row basis. No. And other days I'll just have a meltdown thinking, whoa, this is just not normal. I'm getting cabin fever. I need to leave the house. And when can I go on holiday? When can I see my family who aren't sadly local to me? So, it's brought as many challenges, but also I think there are quite a few positive sort of byproducts, like the fact that, a lot of people have confirmed to their employers that they can work a bit more flexibly. And it's encouraging to see that more employers are going to be adopting that on a longer term basis, which I think, frankly, is going to be for the good of the mental health of the profession.
I think so. I mean, for every person who has found the isolation of being at home and perhaps, the lack of accessible supervision and support, there is another person who likes that ability to have that distance between a colleague that they don't find very easy to relate to. So if sufficient engagement, employer to employee, and support and supervision is in place, I think things will not go back to how they were. And I think there will be a recognition that people can be trusted to work from home, and that, they will deliver. Their output won't fall off the edge of a cliff, which that control aspect with many employers was very untrusting of people working from home. And I think this has proved that, it absolutely is possible. And
that said, I think, yes, there is some control element on employers' part. And of course, there is a certain expectation, especially in a profession where you're tested partly by your chargeable hours target, etc. But I also do think that there needs to be recognition that some of that pressure that prevails, I think individuals can often put on themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that it's a very combustible mix. The pressures of the environment, that, competitive nature of the profession, and pitch that against those perfectionist traits of many that are attracted to the profession, difficulty in saying no, wanting to have that edge over that peer, that competitor in another practice, wanting to, compete for that high caliber client. There is absolutely no doubt that many of the support contacts we receive are people finding themselves coming short rather than someone else indicating that they aren't delivering. So yes, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, no, and I've been guilty of it.
Oh,
You know, in terms of perfectionism, competing with my peers, and taking it personally. And I know when I started working from home many years ago, I probably overcompensated because I was worried, with absolutely no factual evidence to back this up, that my employer might be thinking I'm watching daytime telly.
So you're delivering, your output is off the
Yeah,
scale too.
yeah, and in a way, it was not a sustainable way of working from home because it's no one. You know, I was working through my lunch break, and that's not healthy.
No, those boundaries around lunch breaks, around finishing at a reasonable time, around taking some holiday, even if you can't go any further than the garden, and proving to yourself that really you need allowing yourself that switch off time to reboot. You know, in the same way, if you run a car continually, it's going to break down on you. You need to make sure that you are serviced as a person.
And what do you do to switch off then?
I do walking and reading and, you know, engaging with my friends and family. Nothing particularly exciting, but something that takes me away from, you know, thinking about others, I suppose, because I think that's what often we do. We think about, you know, our extended family and relegate ourselves. Again, that's quite a common trait of those attracted to this profession. We are people that other people come to with problems. So when we have them ourselves, we're often quite reluctant to speak out and seek support about them until we really can't cope any longer.
We're going to run out of time soon, but what I wanted to sort of end with was, you know, in terms of wrapping up, is, you know, what are your sort of top tips, I guess, to maintain that sort of sustainable sort of approach to work, so that whether there's a pandemic or not, because we know that lawyers do unfortunately fall into this group, you know, more than other professionals, what would you advise them so that they can have that sort of balance between work and home life?
Well, it's back to the old adage, isn't it, that no one on their deathbed ever wishes they'd spent more time at home. More time in the office, sorry. Evaluate what's important to you. Don't lose sight of that and have perspective around that, because, you know, ultimately what you value, you need to make sure you take care of that. Work is important, but don't be entirely defined by, or look at the potential pitfalls of being entirely defined by your work. Because when that is taken away at some point, even if you retire, rather than facing a redundancy situation, what are you left with? So it's about perspective. It's about recognizing what is important. If you were to find out tomorrow that, you know, your work was ending, what else would you be able to do and you know, would make you happy, would you value?
Yeah, no, that's a really useful lesson, and certainly something I've been guilty of, you know, that label, lawyer label. And it's, when I had it taken away from me, it took me a while to make that adjustment, but now I know that because I've got that balance, that I don't need to go around telling everyone I'm a lawyer, and you know what, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant. Anyway, look, Trish, lovely catching up with you. Thank you so much for your contribution, and hope you stay well as we approach autumn and winter. Thank you.
Not at all. My pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye now.